We're good.
I think we're good.
Hello, everybody. You are very welcome to the Overlap Rugby Christmas special. I am Daragh. This is Shane, and we are joined today, happily, by Unbiased Rugby. Don, how are you getting on?
Oh, well in yourself. Here's quite cold there.
Yes, it's freezing. This is a decision based on how cold it is. I'm just double jumpered, wrapped up warm for Christmas.
Yeah, so listen, we're going to be taking a look through the last year's season. We're going to also be looking ahead to the Lions tour of next year. We're going to take a quick look at the Rugby World Cup draw. And obviously, any of you guys, if you're joining, want to leave any comments, we'll do our best to answer those, any questions that you guys have as well. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I suppose without any further ado, we'll just start by looking ahead to looking back even over the 2020 season. It was obviously, it started like a normal year, but obviously, as in all things, it was a tough year, and from March, the game pretty much stopped, I guess, and South Africa, I suppose, starting with you, Don, that's the longest layoff I can remember seeing in any country anywhere. I mean, when you guys got back September time or somewhere around then?
It was very, very late. I think. I'm just trying to think. It was probably late in September. It could have. Yeah, it was very, very late in September that we got started, and it was way too long. And but there was a reason why it happened. I'm not besmirching the government or anything like that, but it's you could see by the quality of the games when we first started playing, it was very, very unfit players figure around the field. So it was but it was good to have it back. But look, in all honesty, we were all entertained. Aotearoa was probably one of the best competitions that I've ever seen on telly. So
I mean, Aotearoa was like after a 3-month layoff where we'd all been locked down in Ireland ourselves, and it was it was tough with no rugby. I play rugby, usually couldn't play rugby. I couldn't even work at the time, and to see rugby coming back in such glory, it was one of my favorite ever competitions watching, and I just magnificent rugby all around. I thought the Blues, Hurricanes, and then obviously the Crusaders were just playing exceptional footy. And it ended with a magnificent North v South match in New Zealand as well.
It did,
and it looked at that stage like New Zealand were still very much the standard setters, but it was a fantastic competition.
It really was, and the standard of it was phenomenal through and through, and it showed that you could hit the ground running, I guess, because it wasn't just the domestic South African rugby. I think the first few games in most tournaments around the world, when they were getting back up when back started, were pretty lackluster affairs where you could see a little bit of fitness issues, a little bit of kind of just rustiness. Whereas Super Rugby Aotearoa really from the opening weekend hit the ground running in a major way and set the tone very well, which was nice.
And despite great challenge from the Blues and to some extent from the Hurricanes, the Crusaders still saw off all comers.
The Crusaders are the Crusaders.
Well, the bookies had them as favourites, and they were right again.
Yeah, I mean, what about Richie Mo'unga? Because I thought the Blues were going to. There were a few games where I thought they were in real trouble, and one of them was against the Blues, and Richie Mo'unga really
stepped it up,
turned around, and at the time he looked like the best out half in the world. I remember the little cheeky restart he did around the ground, the game-changing restart where he just grubbered it along the 10, scooped it up and ran. About 40 meters, led to a try. I just remember clutch plays after clutch plays from that Crusaders team, and it definitely helps to get rugby back with an absolute bang. But then after Super Rugby Aotearoa, we had international rugby returning, obviously without the Springboks, who didn't play at all. But what we did get was a Tri Nations tournament. I know a bit of a throwback having a Tri Nations with Australia and with Argentina in with the All Blacks. The All Blacks won it in the end, but I'm curious, Don, what was your sort of assessment of the teams involved? It was a tight competition at times.
It was tight. I think. Dave Rennie, there's been a lot of talk about Dave Rennie, who I really rate as a coach. I think he's got a lot of good rugby RP. You guys can still see me.
Yes, we can.
I think he's got great rugby RP, but I still think there's quite a lot of cracks in Australian rugby. I think they've got the right coach. I'm hoping that they've got the right management behind them. but there's still some fundamental flaws somewhere along the line. But I have a feeling that they're going to address those. I think they really are. Argentina, I think the victory for them was just, no one expected that. Let's be honest. No one expected the victory over the All Blacks. But it shows that they're in a good place. I don't know what's going to happen to them now. They're not even going to be in Super Rugby. They're too far away from any other real competition. So I don't know what's going to happen to them now, especially. I just don't know. I don't see a big future for them at the moment unless they find a decent club competition.
It's interesting. Yeah, there is a professional competition starting in South America, which is having some of those Argentine players being sprinkled around there, and I wonder if we are moving to a more sort of with the teams split more by continents than anything else. So sort of. Time zones being the same region that we look at, and that could be one way to do it. But I think I was reading recently about that Jaguares team that made the Super Rugby final last year. I think just about every player on it is now playing rugby either in Europe or across like in Super Rugby in Australia or New Zealand. So that it's definitely an area of concern for them. That said, it's a place like there's raw rugby talent out in Argentina, and if they can mash the sort of organized defensive physicality that they had in this tournament with a sort of more expansive game that we've come accustomed to seeing from them, they could be useful. I mean, I think in a few positions they have some of the best operators out there. I think Tata Chaparro, you could argue, is one of the best loose heads in the world.
Certainly on the showings in the Tri Nations for sure.
Aggressive scrummaging, super tackling. Really good hustling wingers. They didn't really have an offense this competition. It was all about their defense. And that I think is what stopped them.
The story of the world at the moment, though.
It is a little bit.
Everyone's playing defense. So
Argentina beat the Blues. They turned up at the last World Cup with fixing their horrendous scrum problems that had been a problem for ages. Ledesma came in, fixed their scrum, but somehow undid all the beautiful flowing attacking rugby that had been their MO for so many seasons, and they just need to kind of rediscover that. It's early days yet, though. In World Cup cycle kind of jargon, it's definitely good that they have their scrum back. It's an important element for them, but they need to get a bit more expansive, like everyone else as well. That's like you're saying.
I think sorry to say, but I think that the team that surprised me the most was probably the All Blacks.
Interesting.
It did surprise me from what the level of Super Rugby Aotearoa was, the quality of the rugby, and to see the way that the game plan that they had come up with for, especially the one game against the two games that they lost, and it just I just don't know. I had to look at it, and I was blaming Ian Foster. I've never been a big fan of John Plumtree. I think he's got every team that he's ever coached has had a discipline problem, from the Sharks to the Hurricanes and now it seems like that discipline is creeping into the All Blacks. But I had to really think about it, and I thought, let's be honest. For the last 10 years, the All Blacks have had some magnificent players. If you take Ma Nono, Christian Cullen, Ben Smith, all on the same team, Aaron Smith, Owen Franks, Brodie Retallick, Sam Whitelock.
The list goes on.
I haven't even mentioned the GOAT. So it's. They're coming off a team that was just magnificent, 90% win record. So I think there's going to be a bit of a reset because, to have that kind of group that's once in a generation, maybe once every second generation, you're going to have a team like that. So I had to maybe give them a little bit of a break. What are your thoughts on where the All Blacks might or might not be going wrong?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say that they don't have the same team that they had, but I think you're right to point out, Super Rugby Aotearoa was a clear demonstration that there isn't a talent deficiency in New Zealand. Far from it. It was there's no question, it was a conservative call to make Ian Foster the coach, and we had concerns about the All Blacks pretty much under Steve Hansen, pretty much from the 2017 Lions tour, where they seemed to sort of deliberately switch their game plan from being, you know, totally expansive and playing into their own skill set to trying to match other teams at their game, lean more into a power game, try and kick some drop goals, try and win games ugly. Yeah. And I guess the mindset there was to try and be able to win games in all ways, but they haven't really reached the heights that their offense had in around 2015 since then. So to see, you know, when they opted for the continuity decision with Ian Foster, I thought it was interesting, if not kind of flawed. Naive.
Yeah.
Like if you look at other, obviously Scott Robertson is one that you'd look at from the Crusaders. They do play pretty, you know, they play a pretty structured game themselves, the Crusaders, but they do have an ability to strike and they do lean on their skill set, etc. And then the other one that I would have looked at is Jamie Joseph and his sort of coaching acumen with Tony Brown.
Yeah.
And you see what you see from Joseph and Brown a lot of the time is really, as well as focusing on the skill set, there's a lot of set piece creativity. There's a lot of trying to find space and create things. And like, even if they had gone with Ian Foster, I would have loved to have seen them bring someone like Tony Brown or someone like Jamie Joseph in, just to give them that extra attacking element. Because even when they won games this year, it was still about the power game.
Yeah.
And they have some big boys, like they have a really big pack that they're finding at the moment, but it is all about the power game.
Yeah, and you got to think like this Tri Nations logo that we're looking at is a bit weird because there's obviously one notable absentee, which is the Springboks, and it's like if the All Blacks are going to try and play the Springboks at a power game, they're going to lose that game 9 times out of 10. It's not generally the way they beat the Springboks. It's by being quicker, faster, more skillful, sharper. So they kind of, my thought is just they kind of have lost a bit of identity in terms of what they're trying to do or what they ought to be doing when they're in the All Black shirt. And even though they saved it, it's all, I always have to caveat any criticism of the All Blacks because they still won that tournament and they still did produce some great performances. So it's like these are top level criticisms. Like we were saying, we were concerned from the 2017 Lions tour, and they were probably a lesser team than in 2019 than in 2015, but that lesser team was still a semi-finalist. Yeah. Like, so the drop off, they're still operating at the top level of the game. They're just within that, they're probably struggling to find themselves a little bit, and there are definitely some flaws.
I just look at the depth at every single position that they. I don't see any. Maybe lock. They might. Yeah. It might have a bit of a drop off.
I think Tighthead actually, outside of Alfa Tuamafasi, I think Nepo Lala had a good finish to the season, but I don't know if I'd quite trust him.
But there ain't no Lone Franks, let's be honest.
Yeah, exactly. And Tyrrell Lomax even in behind. I don't know if I quite trust them at prop.
Yeah. Certainly good, judging by what the Argentinians were able to do to them, and even sometimes the Australians as well. Like, again, you got to say the Springboks would be a different monster to both of those teams. And scrum, and even England as well. France in World Cup form will definitely be bringing a scrum to the party. So, they'll have to think about that going forward. But it's not disaster yet for the All Blacks. Far from it. They are Bledisloe champs. They're Tri Nations champs. But just a few little flaws that need fixing.
But to answer your question, I did feel that the Springboks could have played themselves into form. I don't know if we would have won it. I just looking at when the players did arrive back, I think Frans Malherbe weighed about 50 kgs more than when he went into lockdown.
Yeah.
Very, very unfit. Steven Kitshoff just was breathing the heavy ones after 15 minutes. So I think the fitness level was just completely off.
Yeah.
I understand why they did it. I've basically got a saying, in Rusty we trust, and if he said we weren't going to go, then we weren't going to go. So
fair enough.
Yeah, it was. I understood the decision at the time for sure. I remember I was pretty much on side it, and then you had Argentina come out from playing no rugby to putting into performance like that, and everyone sort of got on the backs of the Springboks. But I think probably on balance with all the injuries they had at the time, it was if not the right call, at least an understandable one. And at least they managed to sort of get the domestic season going. As well as the Southern Hemisphere game, there was also rugby happening in the Northern Hemisphere.
Yes.
We finally returned to action in the autumn. We finished out the Six Nations and played out a new Autumn Nations Cup with Fiji and Georgia, although Fiji didn't really get to play in the competition. Mm-hmm. And England swept aside all comers. I mean, from World Cup finalists to winning 2 trophies this year. Although France nipping at their heels, and I would say, Ireland and Scotland sort of as they were, not really kicked on in any kind of meaningful way. Scotland had a good run in the mid-season.
They got their 5 in a row, couldn't quite make it 6.
Yeah,
but
and then Wales having a massive drop-off as well. I'm just curious, Tom, what your assessment is of what's happened up north this year.
Let's be honest. The Autumn Nations Cup was it seemed like a filler. I'm going to be honest. It's not. It doesn't have the same gravitas as the Six Nations. It's. Look, I'll be honest. England deserved to win it. I thought that last game between France and England was. It wasn't the most entertaining game in the world, but it just goes to show how close those two teams actually are to each other. And any one of those teams could have won on that day. But I think France and England are on another level to the rest of the sides. Not to besmirch Ireland at all.
I think that's right about now. You can face on evidence. Yeah.
I think Ireland are. It's hard for me to pick up, and I watch a lot. Actually, I watch quite a few shows. There are a lot of pundits, and they talk a lot of rugby. I watch most of Off the Ball, and all those shows, and so I hear a lot about Ireland. Yeah. And it does seem to me that I don't know what your thoughts are on Farrell.
Well, we were never really Farrell in, so it's tough to call us Farrell out. I wasn't convinced by this. It's a similar thing to what we were saying about Foster and the All Blacks. Like the continuity decision, given how poorly the World Cup year went, seems a bit dubious because it's like, what are we continuing here? And I boiled it down to looking like we are trying to build some different patterns, but it kind of when the pressure comes on, looks like we're reverting right back to the game plan that we had, which kind of boils down to playing Schmidt ball without Schmidt brain in the camp. You have Farrell brain running it instead, and like Schmidt ball was limited, but at least he was a bloody genius, and he had a fair few strike plays that were on the money, and he's a very clever thinker of the game. I'm not convinced that Andy Farrell brings that same intellect to the coaching ticket. And
I'll take Munster for an example. Sorry, I butted in there for you.
No,
not at all.
I'm not a huge big fan of Johan van Graan. I never have been. I probably never will be. I think he's got a certain way of playing, but even he's big enough to know that he needs a decent attack coach. And Larkham has brought something special to Munster that's been missing. And I think that's what's missing at the moment with Ireland. For me to use a player of Doris's quality as an impact player is crazy. You're asking somebody who's really good to play like CJ Stander, and that's just it doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the thing that has concerned me most watching them this year. I mean, there's a number of things, but it's the skill set that concerns me when you compare it to what England or France are able to do. Even Wales at times, if you give Wales a 3-on-2, they'll score, and you haven't really been always able to say that about Ireland. It was a nice performance at the end against Scotland, but really the ability to execute under pressure is something that has been missing, I would say, from Ireland. And I remember reading when Pat Lam came into Connacht, Connacht prior to that had been sort of a side struggling financially. They didn't really have an identity. They just sort of tried to make it difficult to play against them when you went to the west of Ireland, where it was windy and the conditions were terrible. But when Pat Lam came in, I think he just made a point of like, all of these guys are going to get better with the ball. And for I think a whole season and a whole preseason, the whole idea was you're never doing anything, whether it's training, fitness, or anything.
We're making a cup of tea at home, holding the rugby ball.
So they all got really, really good at handling the ball, at giving short passes, at being quick. And I actually think that kind of skill set renaissance is what's needed in Ireland. I think, especially in the midfield, there just isn't enough, even in good players like your Robbie Henshaws, guys who you want to be in the side for perhaps the next cycle. Their ability to just catch pass with accuracy isn't there. And I don't think for a side, like, we can be big and tough on our big days, but I don't think for a side as limited as we are, I don't think we're going to make any waves unless the skill set improves and we can add a real dimension and a threat to our attack.
Yeah, indeed. I'd agree with that.
I'm going to, for me personally, I thought the lineouts you should always win your own lineouts, let's be honest. I thought the lineouts were a bit of an issue. Take a player like Itoje, who's not the tallest player in the world, and for him to be able to disrupt the Irish lineup that badly, there's something fundamentally wrong somewhere along the line. And we were watching a show, and it was actually Victor Matfield was actually talking about that specific game, and he was literally saying, you've actually got to read the lineup before you even get to it. So what's happening is people are making decisions in the huddle, keeping to the decision, and not changing the decision when they actually see the players lining up. And because Itoje should be able, he's not the best jumper in the world. He's not there for that skill, and for me, it just seemed like I think James Ryan is just a sublime player. I think he's on the same kind of level as a Peter Steff and those kind of players. He's a special kind of player. But for me, I'm not saying you need an enforcer, an Eben Etzebeth or something like that, but you need someone who's really a serious enforcer at 4 or something, or some kind of position. CJ Sanders he's not there for that. I just think of it. Imagine having an Eben Etzebeth or a Bucky's Buerta or something like that. Somebody who's really in your face, probably going to get a yellow card every 4th game, or something like that.
It's definitely a thought, isn't it? But I like the line out. I think first of all it needs a change in coaching, but I think it's kind of something that can be figured out along the way, in terms of like it's a long way to a World Cup. James Ryan's form, frankly, has been not great. Like you compare him to 2 years ago, like most of Ireland, and he's not quite the same man. There are up and comers coming at lock. We don't really have units the size of Backy's.
Ian Henderson's the best mold of kind of South African enforcer lock that we would have. He is a bludgeoning kind of big physical presence, but he's also a little young. Like one thing without Dev Toner in there, who had been such a stalwart. They're quite young locks. They're quite green, to be honest. And like when you look at some of the great guys that are out there, like your Alan Wynne Joneses, or even the guys you were citing from South Africa, Victor Matfield from back in the day when he was going as a very seasoned veteran. And those are like the top lineouts in the world. When you have a guy who's still got his physicality and his power, but he's also been around the block a few times. He's been schooled a few times. Like James Ryan and Ian Henderson is a combination we were excited about. It did go to Cardiff, like in World Cup year, I believe, and Wales absolutely schooled them at the line out. Alan Wynne Jones just made it miserable for them. And as unpleasant as that is to watch from Ireland's point of view, those are important learnings for those guys to have, because when they're a bit older, they will be calling those lineouts and they'll have seen things before. I think it gets better with time, but we did get accustomed. We got accustomed to a lot, really. There was a different team all those years ago when you had Paul O'Connell calling that line out. We were always so assured and going toe-to-toe with the top teams in the world at line-out time, because we had an operator of that caliber. Similarly, in the midfield, we're getting frustrated looking at Robbie Henshaw or Bundy Aki not sticking passes, because we were spoiled with a Brian O'Driscoll in there for so many years who's just picking defenses apart. And it's like, now we don't have those players anymore, so how should we play? We definitely shouldn't forget how we used to play when we had them in, but we do acknowledge that we don't have them anymore. But I feel like we're drifting a little bit when it comes to things like skill set, but also the line out. I think we're nowhere near the finished article yet, but we are producing more talent than we were back in those days. That's my ray of optimism for Ireland, is that Munster now have a team that looks better than the last few seasons, with academy lads bolstering it up. Leinster's academy, we know, is producing loads of players. Ulster now have got a tidy little team. They still have a bit of a losing ethic that they could do with getting rid of, but their team is definitely talented. And Connacht are moving the ball well, as we said. So like the provincial strength, the strength in the provinces is there. It's just a filtering up job, and maybe, as you say, it goes to coaching. I'm not sure if the right man's in the job right now.
No, we'll get a full, like, Farrell's contract runs until the end of next year, and with COVID and everything else, the IRFU's been in this position where they haven't got a huge amount of money to spend. So there's no chance at all that he gets cut before the end of his contract. Yeah. But it'll be an interesting decision for them at the end of next year, depending on how things go, whether or not they stick with him, because at the moment, the sort of progression and just the culture and atmosphere in the team seems to be they almost look a little tired. They almost look defeated going out onto the pitch in these big games against England. They don't quite believe.
Yeah, there's no confidence there. Confidence is based on evidence, and it's just hasn't been there in quite a while.
Look, there has been some positives. I think Peter O'Mahony's been playing exceptional rugby.
His form is definitely a positive. He's been phenomenal.
It's really back. I think your back row, if I look at, I really like the game when Standard played 6, Doris at 8, O'Mahony at 7. I thought that was seriously well balanced. And it's so nice that you've actually got players on the bench that could fill those positions. Josh Van der Fleer, I can't remember the other players.
Will Connors. He wears a blue scrum cap instead of a red one, but he's much the same player as Josh in many ways. He sets that pace, makes tackles all day.
You've got a conveyor belt happening now, which is I think is great in those positions. So I think there's a lot of positives. I think it's all going to come down to, is Farrell big enough to ask for help from someone? And I think I hope he does.
Yeah, if you look at the successful guys who make it when they're first time head coaches, I mean, I go back to Leinster and look at Leo Cullen. He came in; it was his first head coach job.
Yeah,
and so that's a very big job for a guy like Leo. And in his first season, he struggled. And what he did was brought in a guy in Stuart Lancaster who, while being derided for not doing well with England in the World Cup, still a very, very smart man who really knows his rugby and has a lot more experience than Leo. And it was one of the wisest things he did was bringing him in and allowing him to step in the limelight. And I think you're absolutely right that Farrell needs, if he's going to be a head coach, he's going to need someone in the ticket who has been a head coach before to help him out in that, because a first-time head coach in charge of a test team that has a big expectations of winning trophies, that's a big ask. And already his back is against the wall in that regard.
I think so.
But we can't ramble about Ireland all day, can we? Steve Hansen, I tell you what, I've heard worse ideas. Get him in.
Yeah. And Mark McCall is another one I keep going back to. What's he doing? He's in the championship with Saris playing no rugby, and he's the Irish.
There's plenty of Irish coaching talent out there. You've Ronan O'Gara, Mike Prendergast. There's a few guys you could look at getting involved. But I don't think we should ramble about Ireland all day long.
No, we'll move on.
Listen, just on matters closer to home for you, after rugby eventually has returned to South Africa, it would be remiss of us not to mention the Bulls, who have, since we last talked, gone from being a team that would always frustrate you and we're never quite putting it all together, to now just sweeping aside all before them and looking to dominate South African rugby. I mean, you must be chuffed.
Oh, finally! We had 3 wonderful years of Super Rugby. I think three championships in 4 years. I think those are the glory days of. But if you look at the kind of players that we had in those days, the Buckies and the Victors, and so Mornay Steyn. You're talking players of their generation. So it's been so nice to actually be able to see Loftus as a fortress again. Pity there's no people there, but it's just nice that it's coming back. I think of all the sides in South Africa at the moment, I think the Stormers, there's a serious problem at the Stormers. There's a serious problem at the Stormers. You can't
Not just to do with Khaleesi's injury, and there's like a few, no sign of Peter Steph du Toit. From the impression I got with the Stormers, just they're missing a lot of their big names.
They have, but you still got Stephen Kitsoff, Bongi Nambi, Frans Malherbe, JD Schickling's playing really well. You've got Damien Willemse. You've got probably all the sevens players in the world. It's you're just not getting it right. I just think I'm not saying John Dobson's a bad coach. I just think he's a bad fit for the Stormers. That's my personal opinion. If I look at the Bulls with Jake White, I think there's great rugby RP there. He culled everyone almost. Literally came in and said, "Listen, you have to apply for your job again." I think with them being owned by billionaires now, I think they want silverware. That's all they want. It's about the silverware. So I think the Bulls are really poised quite well. I think the Lions probably, in the last couple of years, they've probably been our most successful side. I just think they've lost just too many players. You can't lose that many players from the Malcolm Marxes to they lost everyone. Faf de Klerk.
They don't really seem like they have a pack to compete anyway with the big South African
clubs. Not anymore.
That's kind of all been true of them, and they have the altitude to benefit, but they actually got as much as losing a lot of players. I think in the Super Rugby Unlocked section of the Currie Cup in the first bit, they missed a few through COVID as well, and it just didn't seem to be coming up Lions at all this year for one reason or another. Like, they're still pretty dangerous. They still find some tries, and they still can be good in the last quarter up at altitude. But I think they're a little bit behind the likes of the Bulls and the Stormers and probably the Sharks as well.
I think, look, the Sharks, I think, are poised really well. I think it's Sean Everett is their coach. I think it's sure that's his coach. I'm not 100%. I'll have to just confirm that. But he coached most of the guys when they were under 20s. So So there's a lot of those players that have come through with him as the coach. So there's been really good continuity. I think their captain is Lukhanyo Armas. It's probably the most underrated 13 in the world.
I certainly agree with that.
No, I honestly think he must be in the top 5 number 13s in the world.
I would have him at 1.
He's absolutely sublime. Makazola and Pimpi, they've got Sabu and Corsi. I think they've got outside backs that, and even though they're missing players like Afia Duante, not Afia Duante, he's been banned for so long. But there's their number 15, the young kid.
Oh God, what is your man's name? He was brilliant as well.
He's absolutely amazing. Young talent. They got Buthelezi, who was the under 20s captain for junior Springboks. So they've got the players. I think bringing in Ox, they've tightened up their scrum. I think they're the team that could probably do the best in the north. I really do think they would do the best, but obviously I'm going to be a Bulls supporter till I die.
I don't think you should be writing off the Bulls. I think they've looked very, very impressive.
That's true. Yeah, we did watch a bit more of the first half of the South African season, the Super Rugby Unlocked, than the Currie Cup. But certainly at the beginning, I think, especially when Am had a little knock that kept them out of a couple of key games for them, that kind of took them out of the running. But they were looking like they'd been shorn of a few players. I remember their back three, when they finished or didn't finish, they were looking brilliant at the beginning of the Super Rugby season, at the beginning of the year, which is obviously ancient history now because that all got suspended. But it was a completely changed back three that they took to the field in their first Super Rugby Unlocked game with. They seem to have, they had your man Werner Koch, the former Sevens man, who's decent in attack, but I remember one game where he couldn't find the high balls. They were box kicking a lot of ball and he was chasing them and he was just getting completely lost under them, like a man who's from a Sevens pitch who'd never been there before. So from a team that had been so clutch and so dialed in on things like that and pretty professional, they looked a little bit more raggedy at the beginning of the season. They probably improved a bit more.
It's nothing that's not fixable.
No, exactly. No panic in Sharks at all.
I think they've got the players. I think, in all honesty, the game plan that probably works the best is the Bulls. You can see that Jake White touch, good set piece, good kicker, good kick chase game, obviously. Breakdown has to be a nightmare, absolute defense, and play coast to coast. So they're playing the kind of rugby that Jake White's famous for, and you can see the players have bought into the system. And you have to have that, and you have to have a decent captain. And I don't think there's Sia Khaleesi is probably the best Springbok captain we could have, but at franchise level, I think Dwayne Vermeulen's probably the best captain we have in South Africa.
Talk about just leading from example. I mean,
exactly.
He's a sensational player. Just before we move on from the Currie Cup, I wouldn't mind getting your thoughts on something that we've been looking at, which is just, Andre Pollard obviously has been the Springbok 10. He's down at the moment, and the Springboks didn't play this year, so we didn't really get a chance to have the question answered about the backup 10. But I mean, looking across these teams, and you have a lot of guys. You got Mornay Steyn in the Bulls, still getting it done, still playing really well. You've got Willemse in the Stormers, failing quite to kick on, but he's still, very talented young guy. Kerwin Bosch, likewise, could be in that conversation. And obviously Elton Yankees is the incumbent in terms of the backup 10 position. Yeah. And even some guys like Schoeman in the Cheetahs. I'm just curious what your thoughts are on what's coming in behind Pollard and who you think would be the guy. If the Springboks were to play next week or even looking ahead to a Lions tour, what guy would you trust in there if you couldn't pick Pollard?
I'd probably, I'd hate to say this, but at the moment with Damon Willemse has got, there's always been great talk about Damon Willemse. I think he's got absolute brilliant skills. He just for some odd reason, he just hasn't clicked. And for me, with Damon Willemse, I think he needs to go up north, go play in top 14, go play in Europe somewhere, go play in Japan maybe, just to have the pressure taken off him, go play a couple of years overseas, learn a bit of a journeyman kind of skill set, and then come back. I think he needs that. Kerwin Bosch, my father-in-law absolutely loved Kerwin Bosch. He thought he walked on water. So I might have to go with Kerwin Bosch. But if it happened next week, I'd probably have to go with Elton. Not that it's a big call, but as an attacking 10, probably think he's the best attacking 10 that we have in South Africa. But he's ain't no Andre Pollard.
I kind of worry about Elton in the big moments of the big games. I think I've just seen a little bit of
a flicker of non-clutch as opposed to clutch.
And like a guy like Mornay Steyn, I wouldn't like if Pollard was out and you had to start someone at 10, I wouldn't wonder about maybe getting a Mornay Steyn in there.
Because the dream is that if you could marry Elton's skill set with some of the clutch and some of the physicality of either Kerwin Bosch or even your Schoeman from the Cheetahs is a bit more in the mold of Andre Pollard, where just like, and even remembering that World Cup campaign, like Pollard took a lot of contacts and that worked for them because he's kind of like an auxiliary 12 himself some of the time in terms of how he carries the ball. And there's elements of that to Schoeman and Kerwin as well, whereas Elton will just always sit that little bit deeper, ship it on a little bit more, and makes you become a little bit more circumspect and a little bit less hard-nosed and physical, which just doesn't seem like the right fit for a Springbok side to my eye. And I think some of the worst showings in a Springbok shirt have happened with Elton at 10, where it's become a little bit lateral and not as physical as it should be. But I'm also not convinced, because I don't think Kerwin or Schoeman are total rugby players either. I think they could do with a bit of Elton's skill set because they're a little bit clunky themselves.
We have Hooper coming in here saying sadly he agrees and that there is just a massive drop off from Pollard to number 2.
Well, if you're sure we're in no place to talk, Ireland's kind of similar.
Let's be honest. The drop off from Sexton is just that's bigger than
it's a cliff. It's a cliff.
Well, people keep getting reactionary and calling for his head, but it's like, who's going to replace him? And actually, Bigger in Wales is the same as well. Bigger is still the best 10 in Wales, despite all these Callum Sheedy-ish talks. You're like, the best 10 is still going to be your best option. So maybe just try and keep Pollard fit. and don't worry about it.
Well, from your talk, we could have Sexton and Mornay Steyn at the next World Cup with walking sticks. You know, so
Oh, it's true. It's sad, but it's true.
Look, I think Mornay Steyn's playing brilliant rugby. I think he really is. I do think I watched him play 15 in France, and I thought it was a better position for him, a better fit. But it's nice. It's nice to actually see him playing 10 again. Let's be honest, the guy's got a boot that's 9 times out of 10 he's going to score points. So I think he actually wasn't even on my radar until you brought him up, even though he plays for the Bulls. It's just, once they get past a certain age, they seem to be forgotten in South Africa. So
there's something about Springbok pedigree as well. Like there's something about the guy to kick the winning kick. But as Hooper points out, he comes in and says Bosch's kicking game has come together this year, and that is the best thing about Kerwin Bosch. That's why he might win the argument. It's just because
clutch 3-pointers from far away.
He can kick them from far, and he tends to get the important ones. And
you can see he's been coached by Patrick Lambie, so he's been specifically coached by him, and you can see that Patrick Lambie's skill set coming through. So I think that's it could, but I still think he's a couple of years off. He's not ready yet.
I think you're probably right.
Probably so. Yeah.
Listen, we are going to move on. We're going to take a look at the World Cup draw, and we're going to take a look at 2021 on the Lions Tour. Unfortunately, first, it's sort of our due diligence. We have to sort of talk about this emerging story about concussion in rugby.
Yeah.
And so basically this is all triggered by, a couple of weeks ago, it was sort of came out that a multi-million-pound lawsuit from rugby players who suffered permanent brain damage was being taken against the English and Welsh unions along with World Rugby. 2003 World Cup winner Stephen Thompson was involved. He was one of 8 players involved, along with former teammate Michael Lipman and former Wales flanker Alex Popham, who also came out and spoke about it. They've all revealed they have early onset dementia, and I'm not sure if you read, but if you read the pieces with Thompson and Popham, it was some of the most harrowing stuff that, like, it was heartbreaking from a rugby fan's point of view to hear them say, like, I wish I didn't play the game. I feel like I've been let down, and just the stark reality that these are fit 40-year-old men with families who are going to be in need of care in 10 years time. And I think we all know that that's not, an acceptable thing to have happen to a large percentage of people who play the sport. It's probably too high a price to pay.
Just wondering what your thoughts, what has been the reaction to that, even in South Africa, or has it come up as much?
It has come up because it does. Like everyone talks, you hear all these talk, rugby's become soft and blah, blah. But let's be honest, you take a player like Ruan Janssen van Rensburg, the guy from Sale, and 120 kilograms at full tilt sprint center running directly at you. Things are bound to break along the way. It does happen. The players are getting bigger, they're getting fitter. The collisions are getting hot.
That's
a lot harder.
Point. Yeah, because like all this talk about it being soft because there's substitutions now, or it being soft because there's all this, like the game has moved on so starkly. Like you look at the images of Jonah Lomu just being a power athlete and what he did to what rugby players were at the time, it was so shocking.
Exactly.
Whereas now you're looking at a load of Jonah Lomu level physical players. Just the collisions are that much tougher, and with the bench thing, it's that much more intense. So I think the soft argument is a really bad one, and I think it's a deliberately kind of it's a deliberately sinister one. Like they don't fully believe the argument they're making. They're just kind of making. So I don't buy that as an excuse for it. But I think the better argument is that, like Steve Thompson, obviously these guys. I think it has changed for the better, even in the absence of this lawsuit. It's definitely improved on what the England World Cup camp in 2003 was versus what their World Cup in the last few years have been, where it's there's less kind of hard rounds in hard rounds in the gym is the analogy, where you're just doing sparring. It felt like there was a lot of hits and contact training and a lot of very physical stuff in match week, whereas now it's more kind of standoff, a bit less physical, a bit more pattern driven and process driven, which is obviously better. The science is catching up every time.
You can't be doing full contact and training 3 or 4 times a week. That's the kind of stuff. That's what one of the stuff that Alex Popham was saying.
Yeah,
was I think his neurologist estimated he had something like 200,000 sub concussions in his career, which meant he was just getting them every time he went into training.
Yeah.
I think I watched it was an overlap, not overlap, but off the ball. They were chatting it.
Yeah.
I think we all wish we were that big. So it was quite interesting that the one guy brought up the fact of having a mandatory brain scan once a year.
I think that could be a good idea.
I think it's a bloody good idea. I think a while ago I was talking about on a different show. I was talking about having some kind of. It's also about the amount of minutes that you play. It's about resting your brain. It's about resting your body. A rested body is a lot healthier than something that's tired. A player, say, let's. I'm just throwing out a figure. I'm not saying this is the figure, but a player can only play 25 first-class matches a year, and that's it. And so if you're playing 8 matches for Ireland, you can only play 13 matches or 14 matches for your club or whatever, or your franchise, and that's it. It's once you've hit your mark, that's it. That's another way of trying to manage the time. The other one is the breakdown, is the collision at the breakdown. Trying to limit clearing, but how do you do that? That's hard because it is part of the game.
Yeah, it's a tough conversation, the breakdown, but like in general, I suppose, like you're talking about limiting minutes. I mean, one of the things that strikes me that you've got guys like Jamie Cudmore comparing that is the 6-day thing when you've got a knock on the head. Like it used to be, actually, it strikes me as crazy that it used to be back when we didn't even have the science on it, but back in the 90s in pre-professional era, if you got a head knock, if you had a suspected concussion, it was 3 weeks, 3 weeks out of the game. Get your head right, and then if you seem to be fine from there and you haven't suffered any debilitating symptoms, then you can come back in after 3 weeks,
which is more sensible. And the 6 days is another convenient thing. It doesn't. I've never read any science that suggests that 6 days is the magic number for concussion.
It's the magic number to get you good for next week.
Indeed, and
that, like, you were pointing at the positives. I remember looking back in sort of that era of rugby. I mean, actually, the Lions tour of 2009, that second test.
One of the most physical things.
Guys were just basically headbutting each other. I remember Brian O'Driscoll putting in some shot on Danny Rousseau, and Brian O'Driscoll stayed on the pitch. I mean, O'Driscoll, it's amazing. He hasn't come up with anything. He made a habit in his later career of basically getting concussed, lying on the ground, nearly puking with his hands in his head, and then getting up, and all the crowd would go, "Yeah, go on, Brian!" And he'd get back into the game and start making more tackles. And like, thankfully, that's something that doesn't seem to be there now. That's the big positive. Is that in the modern era, like, there's much more attention to detail on those head knocks. As far as the breakdown's concerned, it's probably one of the big areas of concern. They're doing a great job in the tackle area of making sure that nothing goes to the head.
Yeah.
But in the breakdown, obviously things are a bit messier. I mean, there's this big conversation. There's big conversation about the jackal, and if you look back in rugby and even in times gone by, maybe 30 years ago, the jackal wasn't a massive skill.
Yeah.
Like rucks were scrums over the ball a lot of the time. You know, it was about driving, getting your body position low, and driving over. And now in recent times, the sort of David Pocock, Richie McCaw ilk of player has developed a skill of their own, which is a fascinating dynamic to watch. But certainly this year, I don't know if they've got it right at all, because these guys are out exposed, and it takes. Yeah, go on.
I was reading the rules. I was going through the rules of the game, because the laws, because obviously rugby has laws, not rules. Yeah. And one of the laws at the breakdown is that your hips have to be lower than your shoulders, and it's not enforced. Let's be honest. When you're jacking for the ball, how many times do you see the shoulders lower than the hips?
Lower. Yeah, very often, and it's exposing your back, and it means that a player can't really put a legal shot on you to get in there sometimes if you're in that clamped on position.
One thing about policing the breakdown, and
which they have
lying there.
Sorry, I was just going to say they have changed the policing rule a bit this year to give the jacklers more credit, where they're getting turnover steals with less time over the ball, which is good for their safety. But it has resulted in, as we were alluding to earlier, a hell of a lot of kicking, and teams like England saying, "Well, it's a time bomb holding the ball, so we're going to have to kick it away."
There needs to be a balance, though, doesn't there? Where, like, as Don's saying, like, a jackler is legal because he's not part of the ruck.
Yeah.
So he's allowed to get over the ball as long as he's on his feet, because he's the first man in.
Yeah.
But a lot of the time what you see is, like, you know, either 2 or 3 jacklers going in and putting their hands on the ball, which is definitely not legal. Or like a ruck forms, 2 guys are in the ruck, one of them goes, they both go to deck, and then another guy puts his hands on the ball afterwards.
Not legal
which is illegal. And it's just more tight policing of the breakdown, where you can get a more kind of spirited
contest for the ball.
Ball is exactly right. Might make more sense and might do the world a good for
some and others. Communication as well as clear officiating is so key. It's one of the qualities we look for in a referee, is just telling players when they're right or wrong. Like, if you're the second man in, say you're the second man in, and then if he doesn't move, ping him. Like, but the mute refereeing, I think that can cause a fracas and a break, like a deterioration of the breakdown, such that these injuries, like, people are going to go flying in like missiles if the ref isn't officiating at the breakdown, and ultimately do damage that way. Or alternatively, you're just going to end up with these frustration-based outbursts when teams are quizzically looking to the ref because they think they're okay, and then hear a whistle before they hear the ref's voice. That's obviously a problem. So the ref has a huge responsibility, and unfortunately,
I think there's a lot of things that look at, because I was thinking about it just right now. I said, why do you get sent off with a red card for hitting somebody in the head, but the same person that was hit in the head doesn't go for an HIA? And it doesn't make sense. And so I think it's just about enforcing the rules, because I don't want to change the game. And the game of rugby is about gain line success. It's about the breakdown. There's certain things that make the game unique.
It's a physical game as well. It's about at its core, contact. In terms of people who play it, it's about contact. It's about hitting people. It's a way to hit people legally. You know, that's why the people who play the game love the game. Because you get to hit people.
Yeah, and it is a problem if you're going to have all the lawmakers of the game or something be not former players who aren't exposed to that, who are only looking at freeze frame images of a head contact and deciding things. That's obviously not the way the game should go. Like, it does have to have due deference to the fact that it's physical. But I agree that it was still shocking news to hear this, and I think, while it has improved, we still need self-examination going forward. Is still very important. And some of these adjustments that World Rugby have brought in have worked in terms of not changing the game fundamentally, but mitigating against certain dangerous collisions that are more controllable versions, like the high ball, like the high contact ones from a few years ago. I think this kind of has to go the same way, where, like, little adjustments but not sweeping changes.
Yeah, we need more of that for sure.
I agree.
There's kind of 2 sides to it, where you get one, like, you get people saying, you know, the game's gone soft at the sign of everything, and obviously those guys are wrong. And the reason, like, if you actually listen to neurologists talking about this sort of thing, like they're obviously on a different level looking at head injuries, but they're panicked about all sorts of contests. They're panicked about, contacts to the chest, any contacts that move the brain around. So like there's a real danger in the sport if we're not careful in terms of, I don't think we should change the game, but I think we should make it as safe as is humanly possible.
No, okay.
Otherwise the game will not survive. And obviously I just think, ending it with just,
but talking about just a quick 5 minute, 2 minutes Sedgwick. So obviously there's been with COVID and all that, there's been all these rule changes, a lot of them coming out from Super Rugby, Aotearoa, where they want to essentially get rid of the red card. A player can come back on off 20 minutes, I think. There's been a few suggestions that I really like. I do like, I think the 50-20-20 kick. I think.
I do
sometimes. Too. I think it's really good to bring out another defender out of the line. I think that's a decent law change. For me, that's a decent law change. But I don't want to change the laws to suit one team's style of play. In New Zealand, they play very, very open, expansive. It's attacking rugby. You can see all the 5 franchises play that kind of way. So I don't want to see law changes that promote that. I want to see law changes that are more balanced. For me, I don't know what your guys' thoughts are on that.
Well, I mean, I think the 50-22, sorry to cut across the other, I think the 50-22 kick came in there. One of the things that they've been really looking to limit in the context of head knocks as well is just the amount of rucks and tackles and phase play that goes on in the game, which if you take stats from something like the 1995 World Cup final, which everyone remembers as a physical game, but I think they have about like half or even less than the amount of rucks that goes on in your average game of rugby today. There's so much more phase play going on, which means more tackling, which means more rucking, which means more hitting. And while we don't want to rectify that with the sort of kicking game that we saw this year from England, I think opening the rules, a 50-22 law is a really smart one, just to create in a more aggressive kicking game, opportunities to kick more aggressively, a lot more space, fewer rucks, and more emphasis on set piece, which despite the hype like lineouts, the scrums are actually quite safe and great dynamics of the game. I think definitely bringing them in as more decisive perhaps than they have been in recent years wouldn't be a bad thing at all, and that would be more akin to where rugby came from in terms of its roots. The set piece was always very, very important. And I think getting back there would be important, and it would also be nice to
set piece creates space. Set piece
it does. It ties up forward so you can attack. And also the other thing about the 50-22 rule, which is a personal thing of mine, is my favorite kick in rugby is the spiral kick. It seems to have disappeared from the game, apart from the big bombing spiral. If not, in all seriousness, if there was a 50-22 rule that was incentivizing, it would come back in a big way, because it's a more effective kick than the little drop it on the toe, chip over the thing. If you're going to find a corner, find a blade of grass, it'll come back into the game, which I'd be excited to see from a personal one. But I also agree, set piece. There's also all kinds of calls for like your John Kerwin argument about getting rid of red cards because they're ruining the game, or the perpetual wallaby perspective that scrums should just be non-contest, in and out, because we're playing rugby league anyway. We're going to kick it after 5 phases. Like none of that is right. It's all silly, all folly. I think the game is grand with red cards, and to be honest, the talk that red cards spoil games is actually ridiculous, because I've seen loads of games where a red card has happened and it's ended up creating this amazing contest where the dynamic
14-man teams have gone and won games.
Yes,
before.
they have. So I think it's all just ridiculous chat coming from talking heads down south.
That much is
that kind
sure.
of stuff. But
I guess
John Kerwin.
I know.
He has some moments.
I think he's trying to model himself on the sort of American shock jock sports commentator kind of guy. I think that's his whole shtick. But anyway, I think just to move on, wrap up that conversation, it's probably important just to say, obviously hearts go out to Steve Thompson and all those players and all the other players, Alzheimer's. It's just terrible. But given the season that's in it, I don't think we should linger on the negative too much. And I think we're going to move on, and we're going to just look at we got fascinating news the other week, I think on Monday of last week, looking ahead to 2023. The World Cup draw was made, and wouldn't you just know it, Ireland and South Africa right there in Pool B.
Yeah, on full screen there.
Are you happy with that one, Dom?
Look, I watched the draw. I watched it live. I couldn't understand why Wales were in the first draft, but that's first tier. I couldn't understand it, but these things happen, as they say. Look, let's be honest. They're saying Pool B is the pool of death at the moment. I'd say Fiji probably. Japan and Argentina probably want to have something to say about that too. In all honesty, it looks like obviously Pool A. I think it's absolute. New Zealand and France are going through.
Foregone conclusion. Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I think that's
the worst. I always hate a group where it's like that, where there's no dynamic about who might make it to the quarters. And New Zealand and France, like that's the kind of group that we could do without seeing if rugby's going to move on.
It's not dissimilar to the group you had, where it was yourselves and the All Blacks and Italy, and then two other players to be named later in this instance, where it's like,
well, it's going to be Uruguay and Namibia.
Probably, in all likelihood.
I reckon USA could pip Uruguay.
USA could pip them yet. Uruguay definitely didn't have it all their own way this season, but they were definitely good value in the last World Cup.
It really doesn't matter though, in terms of like
doesn't matter at all.
No, well, like Italy were the great illustrators of that in that last World Cup, where like they absolutely hosed the two lower teams, Namibia and Canada, in their thing. They were on another level entirely. And then they had a game against the Springboks where it was revealed that they were nowhere near that level at all. And they didn't get to play the All Blacks, but it would have been the same story. And that's kind of the big issue. Whereas the people are griping about Wales, Australia, Pool C being kind of the exact same, because Wales, Australia, Fiji, and Europe 1, which is probably going to be Georgia, as it usually is. So that's pretty much an identical pool to what was there the last time. But if you'll recall, that was the greatest pool of all World Cups ever, because every single team in it got a win, which doesn't happen. Like that hadn't happened since the very first World Cup.
That's right.
And so that's the more important thing. People always railing about things just diminishing the game, and I'm like, what really would grow the game is if in 20 or 30 or 40 years time, every team in every pool is really there to try and fight for a quarterfinal place, which isn't quite where we're at right now. But Pool C is a little illustration of how it could happen. And that,
we'll come to Pool B now, but Pool D.
It's a good one for England, because they tend to have Japan and Argentina in their back pockets a lot of the time.
They're going to miss New Zealand, France, or South Africa, or Ireland, or Scotland. So they're missing in the next round. So they're going to miss all those teams in the semis. The team they're probably going to face they probably will face Australia. No, they won't. Wales.
Probably. Fiji,
maybe Fiji.
Maybe. But I don't think of Pool C and Pool D, there's no other team there that's on the level as England. I'm going to be completely honest. There is no other team.
Not right now, but it is a long way out. And we do have a comment here from Jordan just saying, just asking, have we already chatted about the Rainbow Cup, the upcoming Pro 16 finish to the season? We haven't. We are going to. We will get to that later in the show. Just highlighting that. As far as the draw itself is concerned, it is a good one for England. What I will say is that I there's a long time. Like Australia are building. I think Fiji under Fern Cotter are building. We all know that Wales have the capacity to be good or terrible. So it is. We are 3 years out from the World Cup. I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that England get to a World Cup semi-final.
No, and sure, both Australia and Wales, in their own special ways, have a really lovely place in their heart for making England suffer where they can. Sure, to remember the pool, the notorious pool 2015, where both of them contributed to knocking them out of their own World Cup. I wouldn't be writing off their capacity to compete with England just yet, but it's certainly in the context of Pool D. I think England are topping that one, with Japan and Argentina perpetually suffering from inferiority complex when it comes to playing the English. But between themselves, Japan and Argentina is one of the fixtures I'm most excited about for this coming World Cup. I think that's going to be an absolute banger.
Great.
Both teams are at different parts of their development, and I don't know which one will arrive into the World Cup.
Japan won't go quietly into the night. They're going to want to maintain this quarterfinal, this top this position in Tier 1. That's going to be a banging game. And actually, that's potentially be a great group. Oceania 1 could be someone like Tonga or Samoa, and then America's 2 could be Uruguay or USA. All coming teams. It has a potential to be a good group. On the other half of the draw, things get a lot uglier for Ireland. I mean, Pool B being the group of death is certainly a nice thought. It puts us in a nice position, but for us, it's it's not the worst. When the pools came out, it's not the worst pool. Like, we knew we were going to get someone from the top tier. Obviously, we were hoping for a side like Wales, who we feel we could beat, but chances are we were going to get the All Blacks, we're going to get England, we're going to get South Africa.
Yeah.
As it was, we got South Africa. It's sort of 6 of one, half a dozen of the other this far out from the tournament.
Yeah.
But the real toughie is the quarterfinal draw. Is regardless of what happens in the Springboks game against France, we get New Zealand or France. Yeah. The hosts who are looking brilliant, and the All Blacks who are the All Blacks.
Yeah.
I mean, man.
Yeah, and coming from a group where they have Italy and 2 other things, they won't be burned out by the time they reach quarterfinal stage. Far from it. They'll be rested. They'll be primed. They'll be planned. So yeah, it's doing it the hard way, isn't it? There's no easy runs to the World Cup final, as Ireland have constantly suffered. And to be honest, as bad as it is for Ireland, Scotland are probably feeling a bit miserable right now as well. Because
I watched an interesting show about. They were talking about, because everyone's talking in Ireland. Let's rather focus on 2027. And I sat back and I thought, that's just rubbish. You know what I mean?
No, of course.
And I know, I'm sure you guys just want to get to a semi at one point, but what the guy was saying is you don't go to a World Cup to win a semi-final. That's not why you go to a World Cup. You go to a World Cup to win the World Cup.
Yes.
And that's what you got to plan for. Even though you're in the pool and you've got to face New Zealand next, you're going to have to face them at some point.
Yeah.
You're going to have to face England at some point. So you've just got to go in there and say, well, we're going there to win, and that's just the way it is.
The thing that with even more, like, I actually think the result doesn't even need to be the focus, because Ireland are actually coming from an even lower ebb than just the fact that they haven't won a quarter final. Actually, like, since I was born and you were born, like, we were both born after 91, which was the last time that Ireland actually played well in a quarterfinal.
Yeah,
they nearly beat Australia. Michael Lina, I think, got a late try to take the game away.
Yeah,
and since then they have been hammered,
blown away.
So
it's like, whatever about winning a quarterfinal, you got to be competitive in a quarterfinal.
What Ireland need to get right first and foremost, forgetting about who the opposition is just performing at a World Cup, just putting out their best effort and playing as well as they can.
Yeah,
that's what they haven't done so far. So actually, all of the draw stuff is immaterial, because we have not shown up to a World Cup quarterfinal, at least since we've been born, since we've never seen it from Ireland.
You win World Cups by focusing on what you're good at, and you don't win it by studying the opposition and seeing which route you're going to take. You win rugby by playing the style of rugby that makes you win. For South Africa, it's to play a forwards physical game. New Zealand, it's a nice expansive game. Wales will just play set piece after set piece until you tire out, and so not set piece. Phase after phase, sorry. And so it's about enforcing what you're good at. And I think if Ireland can find that identity in the next year or two, I think that's what you've got to focus on. And you just got to focus on what you've got control of. You've got control of yourself. And that's...
Yeah, I can agree with that.
The rest falls into place.
Absolutely. Yeah, as far as the rest of it's concerned, I mean, that's basically the crack with the draw. I mean, we're still at the stage where there isn't too much intrigue as far as who's going to come into the quarters. Could Scotland pip Ireland? Maybe. Could Japan and Argentina have a ding-dong battle? Maybe. It'll be interesting to see the tier 2 teams play it out. I mean, all of that's decided actually over 2021 and 2022. And we'll certainly keep you up to date on all the tier 2 goings at the moment.
Yeah.
But at the moment, there is still a stark divide between tier 1 and tier 2. And I think if you were picking out quarterfinals, it'll be from the band of teams that you see there. I don't think I don't think we're at the stage yet where a qualifier is going to threaten a quarterfinal place. Although that is eternally the hope.
That is the hope. Game. Well, Portugal were looking pretty good. Maybe Portugal as final qualifier winner could be shocking Wales. This is the dream. So. I doubt it.
But maybe someday in the future.
Yeah.
Listen, we're going to move on from that.
Yeah.
Our second last segment of the day. We're just going to look ahead to next year, and obviously the hope is that the game returns to some form of normalcy, and we're going to look ahead to what we hope will be a going ahead Lions tour.
Yeah.
I mean, buzzing for it if it goes ahead. What's your feeling about, do you think that this is likely to happen?
I don't think England or South Africa, or not England, I don't think any of the home nations in South Africa can afford for it not to happen. I think it's the amount of money that's generated, and it's the second biggest after the Rugby World Cup. So the amount of money that gets generated from the tour is just it's colossal. It has to happen in some shape or form. So
the fear for it that I would have is just like, is it going to be the same, tour de force if there's no fans? And that's like, is there a sense that maybe pushing it back a year, while that might affect your short-term budgets, might actually maximize value from it? If you do it in 2022, you might actually get more value from it because you might be able to get fans. Like, obviously the hope is, vaccine comes out, everyone's okay, and the fans are going to be allowed in full capacity come next summer. But there's a very real chance that, you're going to be looking at limited capacity maybe, or maybe no travel at all. And,
that would obviously affect all the revenue that normally is generated from Alliance.
So I wonder if they'll move it to 2022. I'm not sure.
I don't think anyone really knows just yet.
I don't. I think everything's up in the air. I think our country relies heavily on tourism. It's probably one of our biggest employers in the country. So it's not just the money that's generated during the tour itself, but it's all the travelers that arrive in the country that spend pounds and euros, and they employ so many people in this country.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a tough one. It really is tough. How do you balance, feeding 14 million people, because that's how many people are employed in the tourism industry, as opposed to saving lives? It's tough. It's tough. It is a tough one. I hope it happens. I hope it's safe. I hope there's a vaccine. I hope we win.
There's lots. That's funny. We hope the same thing, I guess.
I guess
I bought my tickets. I got tickets to watch the Stormers game. I had to do the maths, because not that I'm going to support the Stormers. I might support the Lions in that game. They just can't happen that I can support the Stormers. But I was doing the maths. For me to buy jerseys, 2,500 rand to buy one of each. Then I've got to spend 2,000 rand on decent tickets for me and my wife. Another 2,000 rand buying food and snacks and stuff like that. So I thought, what? That's to go to one of the big games. And I just thought, what? I'd rather. I want a flag. I want a scarf. I want a hat. I want a jersey. I want all of it. So I'll go to one of the smaller games, and then I can get to watch the big games on my big screen. So I think I'm going to end up doing that.
Yeah, give us a sense if you can, because obviously we don't really get it, because the Lions don't tour here. The Lions go off and tour elsewhere. But how sort of big of an occasion is it across South Africa? Like massive in terms of the rugby community.
Yeah, it only happens once every 12 years. And yes, it's even big. When they're in New Zealand, it's big. It's big for us. When they're in Australia, it's big for us. So it's something that's shown on telly here. Everyone talks about it. So even if it's not even being played here, so it is a big tour. The only problem is we just haven't seen the Springboks play at the moment, and that's
good. I was going to ask you, are you going to have a game under your belt at all between World Cup final and the Lions tour? That's surely a surreal state of affairs.
I think we have organised to play Argentina.
Right. A good test.
I can't remember who else there. I think there's two that they've organised to play at altitude, so it's going to be quite intense. So I think, but two internationals before the Lions arrive, that's absolutely nothing.
Preparations have understandably been.
Would you be worried at all, like in terms of your feeling about the tour? Obviously, World Cup champions, a rake load of talent in the country. Sky high confidence wise. Is there a fear? Are you afraid of anything that you see in the Northern Hemisphere? Or do you think if you get it right, you should be able to do it?
I think we have. It's a wrong term to use, cattle, but I think we have the players, even just available in South Africa, that could compete. Maybe not win. Just based in South Africa, and I think if we played at our absolute best, and we always have a chance to win. But But yeah, I think at the moment with the lack of game times, I'm feeling maybe 60-40 to the Lions at the moment.
Wow. Interesting.
I don't know about that, but yeah, we'll see. I remember the last Lions tour of South Africa. It was after you guys had won a World Cup as well. You actually had a bit of a drop-off season in 2008, but basically had the same team that won the World Cup with a couple of additions come out and put together one of the all-time great test series against a very good Lions team.
Yeah, that's probably my favorite Lions tour of all time. Certainly since I've been watching. Despite the fact that we lost it, I thought it was an absolutely tremendous tour in 09.
Such high
standard. Like the midfield partnership of Jamie Roberts and Brian O'Driscoll going up against World Cup winners in the back line.
John de Villiers and Jack Ferree.
Brian Abana at his absolute pomp as well. It was just a great tour, to be honest. It had all kinds of twists and turns to it. I think it's probably my favorite, just stylistically, in terms of a Lions tour, because sometimes it can be a little bit clunky. Obviously, it's a tough task for a Lions coach to try and get an identity for the team. Yeah, it depends what players you have and what opponent, because you don't want to play a power game against the Springboks, as England learned. So,
I mean, we saw 4 years ago with Gatland's Lions in New Zealand. They did end up managing to squeak the draw by the narrowest of margins, with Romain Poit assisting. But early in the tour they really struggled with some of those club sides. I'm curious, what would be your favorite club side, or what would be the one that you would tip as most likely to cause an upset?
The current format, I'd say they'd battle against the Bulls. I really do think they'd battle against the Bulls. I think the Bulls have the right pack. But the Lions would probably learn the most from the Bulls on playing the Springboks. So I think they play the Stormers first. I think that's going to be a fairly easy game. In all honesty, I think the first two games are at altitude, if I'm not mistaken.
Right, I'm not sure.
There's probably wisdom in that, in terms of the Lions getting adjusted to it. It's a huge home field advantage for you guys. It's because as good as some of the Irish players are, it's just not something we experience. Unless we really take a few months to go out and train at altitude and get prepared for it. It can be a shock to the system.
Yeah. And
look, I still at the moment 60-40 based on, because I just haven't seen the Springboks at all. But I know that all the players are keen for it. I think even Etzebeth chomping at the bit. Most of them have all signed their contracts, basically stating that they're going to be playing the Lions. Cheslin Colby, he's a special player, by the way.
He's the best winger in the world. I don't think there's.
He's absolutely sublime. But it's if they can get marks back from Japan, if they can get enough time together, yes, I think it'll be super entertaining. And look, Russie's really known to play the long game, so I think he must have some plan hatched somewhere along the line. So let's see.
Yeah. Razzie's gone up to director of rugby now, and Jacques Niemeyer is the head coach. I'm curious, is there a concern there at all? Obviously, this is what Razzie wanted. Niemeyer was the defense coach, and you cannot argue with that defense. It was the best defense arguably we've ever seen. But he is coming in now as a head coach. I'm not sure how much experience he has in that role. Is there a concern there for you, or do you think they'll kick on and perform much as they have been since Razzie came in?
I think Razzie didn't come back as Springbok coach. He was brought in to save South African rugby because it was desperately needed. Let's be honest. It was a Hail Mary to try bring in the best coach that we could bring to save South African rugby, because we were in a real bad state. We just lost to Ireland by 30 points.
Lost to Italy at some point along the way. Well,
Italy, these are teams that we shouldn't be losing against, and we were. So he was brought in for specific tasks. That's why his contract was so long. I think it was like 6 years or something ridiculous. And so he was brought in specifically to save South African rugby. But on arrival, we had probably not my favorite Springbok coach ever, Alistair Coetzee, there's
nothing nice to say, so we'll just
say nothing at all, as my man once said.
I'll just leave it at that. And so he had to take over the Springboks to try save the Springboks. But his role is to work at rugby at all levels. So it's obviously bringing through the school talent. It's working with the pony players. These are players of national interest.
Okay.
So there's like 90 players, or 7 per position, and these are players that they pay a little bit extra. They monitor their fitness, so he's working with those. It's working with the franchises and obviously the Springboks. So he was brought in for that. So it's to fix the conveyor belt, and obviously he has, but he had to take over the Springboks at that point. I think Jacques is good. I hope he has a decent attack coach. I really do hope they bring in somebody decent on attack. I don't know who they're going to bring in, but I think they need someone. The best attack coach in South Africa is probably Swys de Bruin, but he doesn't handle pressure very well. So I don't think they'll get him again.
Right.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting one. I think there's another. I don't know if Jacques has taken a club side as a head coach, but no, there you go. It's a first time head coach job for another guy in Test rugby. So there's not necessarily concern, but perhaps a little question.
Well, it's just untested so far. It being the weird year that it is, and we're obviously reviewing it, but it's like it's never happened before that the world champions have gone a full calendar year without playing a match. So it's like all of these questions will hopefully be answered in due time, but we don't have any evidence to go on.
I saw an interesting interview with basically Rassie Erasmus is still doing the game plan for the Springboks.
Yeah.
And then Jacques Nienaber is obviously coaching the Springboks. So Rassie's still the brains. Let's put it that way.
Well, did you see much of the Chasing the Sun documentary? I didn't get a chance to see all of it, but I saw lots of clips and stuff on Twitter. But what just struck me is that there's a real sort of emotive presence to Rassie in the dressing room. Like you could every time he spoke, everyone was fixed on him, and you could see that they wanted to run through walls from him. I just think he's like as much as the director of rugby job is important. I think he's such a charismatic figure as well as everything else. It would be a loss not to have him in the dressing room in some department.
That's what I was thinking. Just about to say, I think come big days like the Lions tour, or if they're in a World Cup final again, I think Rassie will be in the dressing room where he belongs, because it's like, he's Mr. South Africa from where I'm looking at as well. He kind of came in and fixed everything in the national side in 18 months to get them ready to go and win the World Cup. And then he's turned his eye towards, as you were saying, the more domestic stuff, the franchises, and he's got them better. Like there was a rudderless aspect to some of even your beloved Blues a few seasons ago, where Bulls even, like Blue Bulls, where they'd win one game really well and then lose in Loftus the week after against someone they really should be beaten. And it's like really kind of up and down kind of things. All the sides this year, even in the Currie Cup performances, seem to have more grit, more organization, and just a bit more, just more professionalism from top to bottom. And I think that seems to be Rassie's influence just sprinkled all over. They
just need more money to keep their players.
Yeah, that too.
That's always a concern.
Yeah.
Listen, we are going to wrap up the show presently, but we're going to just take a look first of all. There was news that came in this afternoon about something what they're calling the Rainbow Cup.
Yeah.
But essentially, the Pro 16 is going to be beginning earlier than we thought.
Yeah.
There's going to be they're going to be joining as early as April, so they're going to wrap up their domestic season, have a bit of an off season, and then essentially join the Pro 12 season in a sort of a Rainbow Cup format. Is what they're calling it. Towards the end of it. So it's been confirmed that the Bulls, Lions, Stormers, and Sharks, the 4 Super Rugby franchises, are going to be switching their focus to the Northern Hemisphere, while the Cheetahs will unfortunately make way. I'm curious what your thoughts are. This is a major switch, and it looks like they're in this sort of for the long haul to move to the Pro 16. How are you feeling about this move?
Obviously, I've watched Super Rugby my entire life, so it was a bit of a shock that New Zealand basically kicked us out. I have to word it that way.
I don't know if that's what happened, but we will say so anyway.
But I think the writing's been on the wall for quite some time. And Rassie, he summed it in really well. He said most people in South Africa, we love having braais barbecues. That's what we do. We have them at 4:00 in the afternoon. We have beers. We watch the rugby game. That's how we should be watching rugby. Whereas when you play in New Zealand, you're watching your games at 7, 8 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah,
it doesn't have that same feel. So from that point of view, I'm excited. The beauty of Super Rugby is we obviously get to play New Zealand sides every single year.
Yeah.
On the flip side, you get to lose to New Zealand sides every single year, so that also becomes quite hard.
Yeah.
I think it's a good move. Honestly, I really do think it's a good move with the CVC actually now owning Pro 16, or they must have a big shareholder. They're also the owners of
stake in it. Yeah,
the Pro of Six Nations. I think it's a good move. I think there's a decent amount of competition in the Pro 14. I really have thought there was. Yes, not all the games. Some of the games are real big letdown, but I also think the style of rugby that's played up north is a little bit more conducive to the way that we play rugby, as opposed to the way that New Zealand play rugby or Australia play rugby. And I think that's maybe why New Zealand and Australia are going their own way, because their style of rugby is a lot closer to each other.
Yeah,
and including Japan and something like that. Then I think
it's the island franchise, and then
I think it's all. Whereas I think we play our style of rugby is a lot closer. It's set piece based. It's kick based. It's take your penalties, score your points. That's how we play.
You'll fit in very well up in Thomond Park. A game between you and Munster in Thomond Park will be well on the cards, And
I think vice versa is going to be. I think playing at altitude for some of the teams. Yes, you played at the stadium in Bloemfontein, but then Ellis Park's even higher.
It's Ellis Park is going to be very tough. It's going to be a shock.
Well, Leinster, our beloved Leinster, haven't lost a game in the Pro 14 in many, many years, but they are 0-1 in Bloemfontein against the Cheetahs. We played precisely one away game against the Cheetahs and lost it in a big, open, very expansive, very high-paced game with the youngsters out. It's like there'll be a lot of good dynamics like that, and some Pro 14 teams will respond better than others. I kind of fancy Scarlets to score a few tries at altitude as well. I see Edinburgh getting torn apart at altitude.
There might be a touch of like home field advantage ruling the roost for the first season or so, perhaps. I'm curious, like, how well do you foresee them doing? Like, do you think there's playoff potential? Do you think there's a chance for some of these teams to come straight in and win the competition? I certainly think you have as good a chance as anyone. I
honestly feel let's be honest, okay? The goal must be at some point to play European rugby. It has to be. There has to be a goal to play European rugby. If that's not the goal, then there's something completely missing.
Totally.
I think some of the sides, I think the Bulls and the Sharks will probably hit the ground running. I think some of the teams who are going to battle against the Lions play at such breakneck speed, and when you're playing at Ellis Park and they're playing at 1,000,000 miles an hour, it's hard to play against them. The Stormers will eventually get better. I think all the teams will benefit the most. I do think the Irish sides will probably benefit the most.
I think so too.
I agree.
Because the way that your system is based that you only pick players from locally. They play locally, so it's centrally contracted. You rely on having a strong domestic competition, and so you need teams of a higher quality to give you that quality.
Precisely right. Yeah, precisely right.
So I don't think you're getting it from Scotland. Maybe one of them, maybe one or two. Wales.
It used to be from Glasgow.
The problem with Scotland is that they're losing all their players now as well. That's like they do not have the depth to cope with 4 or 5 of their best players going abroad
every year,
and that's what's happening.
Or the fact that Gloucester lose Danny Cipriani, and then suddenly Adam Hastings is just wrenched out of Glasgow because he's going to play in Premiership now. Like, that just keeps happening. And same with the Welsh provinces. Like, I was remembering a few years ago, I think it was a few weeks ago, Leinster were playing away in Ospreys. And that has been traditionally, like the Ospreys have won the competition before. They've been a great side in years gone by. We're kind of underachievers for lots of years, but at one point they were the Welsh national team with Tommy Bowe and Jerry Collins added to the mix. They were a bloody brilliant side. And just watching the Leinster kind of B team with a bunch of kids go out there and effortlessly swat them aside as if they were nothing was just as good as it is from a Leinster point of view. We were also just being a realist and going like, this isn't competition that we need. Like, to be honest, this is that we should be being tested more by these fixtures.
Better Leinster sides than this one have struggled to win the competition in seasons gone by.
And struggled to win at this venue against this team.
It's definitely dipped. I do think the injection of the South African sides, it's going to inject a bit of money, a bit of intrigue,
and a bit of quality.
So it has the chance to boost Welsh and Scottish rugby as well. But I do think you're absolutely right that the long-term goal should be the Champions Cup, because that is the standard.
It's where the money is for us. At the end of the day, I was just doing salary caps. I was just working at salary caps. South Africa's salary cap for a franchise is £3 million, which is half of what Leinster have. It's less than half. And so we have to find the money from somewhere to be able to try keep our players. No one's going to try keep their players from the top 14. I think their salary cap's hitting 11 million now. So it's you can't compete against that. But it's coming down for us. It's about the money. Really just to save our game, we need money here, and we're not going to get it from New Zealand or Australia.
More likely,
we're only going to get it up north.
Yeah, no, I think you're dead right, and that is the heart of this decision. It's the reason it's being made. It's even with the reference to the Rainbow Cup. It's the reason it's being accelerated, because I know Nusafora was coming out just a few weeks ago from Ireland's point of view, talking about how we're trying to move negotiations forward to get them in even this season. Because it's less important about the dynamic of a kind of chopped up tournament that's arranged in a COVID year. That's less important than just getting the South African sides in, getting an injection of a bit more quality in the competition, which is struggling, lacking for consequence in a lot of the games and lacking for quality in a lot of the games, and that ultimately is going to diminish the product. And I think as well, your point that you're making, like there needs to be that pathway for the Springbok franchises or the South African franchises to play in the Champions Cup, because otherwise, like if you bring them into the Pro 14 or Pro 16 as it is, and then make the caveat, they're in this, but even if they win the comp, they're not allowed into the Europe thing. That's just, it's ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense at all. Then they may as well just play the Curry Cup.
The competition would be enhanced by the presence of them as well. Just one thought on the Cheetahs. I think, like, obviously the Southern Kings were in the competition alongside them, and they've
no tear shed for the Southern Kings.
No,
but definitely a tear shed for the Cheetahs.
But the Cheetahs being booted out of the competition to make way for the 4 Super Rugby franchises hasn't sat well with a lot of fans up north. I think people were enjoying their contribution to the competition. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that. Was it not a little harsh to get rid of them?
In South Africa, the Cheetahs are probably everyone's second favorite team. It always has been everyone's second favorite team. They play a brand of rugby which is quite exciting. It's fast paced. It's not, it doesn't always win games, but it's entertaining. And I do think they've I think this year they were middle of the road, if I'm not mistaken, in the Pro.
They were there, and I think on the opening season they might have made the playoffs.
They made the playoffs in the playoffs in their first year. Yeah, they did, and then they
would have got better. Toyota had re-signed with them, so they did have the financial backing. The problem is that Bloemfontein is quite small, so it's not one of the big cities. It really is. It is one of the smaller cities. The worst thing was the Kings. That was the worst, because they come from a part of South Africa where rugby is really big. And you're talking Laconia Arm came from there, Sia Khaleesi, Makazole and Pimpi. They all came from the Eastern Cape, and they just couldn't get it. They just couldn't get it right. But yes, I am sad to see them go. I thought they would have brought back a team like the Cats, which was a combination of the Lions and the Cheetahs.
That would have been
would have been a good compromise.
Maybe that would have been interesting.
Because I think the Lions, like judging, like even going back to what we were talking about the Curry Cup, they'll probably struggle a bit in given where their pack's at as well. Might have made sense. They could have been a superpower if you put those two together, but definitely just getting rid of the Cheetahs entirely didn't really sit well with a lot of Pro 14 fans up here, because to be honest, like a lot of Six Nations fans will only watch domestic rugby, and they were only introduced to South African club rugby via the Cheetahs and the Kings, and of those two, there was no doubt the Cheetahs were the ones contributing and the Kings were not. And the majority of fans up here probably wouldn't be watching Super Rugby Unlocked or Curry Cup. So it is a bit disappointing. It's met with a little bit of disappointment. But sure, look, the decisions made now, hopefully the Bulls, the Sharks, the Stormers and the Lions can play a brand of rugby that'll just make people forget that and get people excited for just the new layout of the new tournament.
So if we fast forward 6 months into the future and we have a Rainbow Cup final between Leinster and the Bulls, what happens? What happens?
Well, I think we'll have a pre-show, and then
we'll have to. If that's how it all goes, for sure. Yeah.
And then we'll have the post-show at my party, where we've won. But I think it could be a cracker of a game. Depends where it's played. If it's played at Loftus, I think, and it's full stadium, I think Loftus is an amazing place when it's full stadium. It's an experience. It's a serious experience. So hopefully there's crowds, but I have to go with the Bulls. Come on, Bash. I have to go with the Bulls.
That's my feeling as well, is that home field advantage is going to be massive. Like, I think getting your boys down to Dublin might be a tough task as well. We definitely don't like to lose games at home and don't do it very often, especially when there's crowds. I think it would be as good a final and as good an occasion as the Pro 14 is, or Pro 12 is delivered in many years.
Not just that game. I think Munster versus the Sharks is an absolute monster game that could be excellent. You know, Scarlets versus the Lions. Excitement
Ulster
all
against
over.
The Lions,
Ulster against the Lions,
It'd make the competition a lot more interesting if because literally half the teams would be of a high enough quality. Is that half the games that you watch on the weekend would be of a decent quality?
Which and is not the ratio right now.
100%. I guess just one final question before we move on and wrap up the show and let you go and celebrate the holiday season. We have just off the back of this, we've got the Springbok sides coming north. You got all this talk about money and the need for it and the value of European money. Is this move and this focus a sign of things to come? I mean, we were talking about Argentina and their professional league that they're starting in South America. You're talking about Japan and Fiji coming in with New Zealand and Australia and that sort of part of the globe. Is there going to be? Do you get a sense that there's going to be a conscious switch from South Africa to Northern Hemisphere rugby to that kind of time? And are we poised to see the Springboks in the Six Nations sometime soon? Or is there just too much value in playing in the Rugby Championship with the All Blacks and the Wallabies for you to make that move?
I was thinking about this the other day. I don't know if you watch Hockey Time Rugby. I was chatting to Zach Hockey Time Rugby, and I said, wouldn't it be nice if we played this for the Springboks? The best game to watch. Not to knock anybody else, is obviously we like playing in the All Blacks, and of course. It's generally the game we wait for the most, but we get to play them every year, and it's just not the same. It's just like it's just be playing the All Blacks, and I don't know now they want to do a home and away, not a home and away. So you play both your games one year in New Zealand, and the next year you play both your games in South Africa. So you only get to see the Springboks every second year, or the All Blacks every second year. Yeah. I was thinking. This is just me thinking that if we went north and we went and played Six Nations and we got to play the All Blacks once in a cycle, proper tour, 3 full games, 3 games against franchises, and you only get to see the All Blacks every 8 years because you play your 3 games once in this cycle and once in that cycle. I think you could have a tournament that wouldn't make as much money as the Lions, but you'd probably make even more money from that.
The buzz of the Lions, of the Springboks touring New Zealand again, or vice versa, would definitely generate so much media attention and revenue. It would be
a different kind of thing. I definitely think it's all up in the air right now, so obviously, we don't really know what's going to become of it.
We are getting a sense of what the Springboks are angling for with this Pro 16 move or Rainbow Cup stuff, and just the kind of shifting focus from south to north, as well as it has to be said, the successes of the relative successes of Super Rugby AU and Super Rugby Aotearoa, as well as Super Rugby Unlocked. Super Rugby had been it's a historic franchise. It had been great in years gone by, but there's no doubt that the feeling was that it was kind of waning with all the chopping and changing of the format. It was diminishing the integrity of the tournament. And certainly the Aussie crowds were just not there, and they were losing interest, mainly because, as you said, it's no fun getting hockeyed by New Zealand teams every year. But when they have a domestic competition like Super Rugby AU, suddenly you have competitive, compelling fixtures. The crowds are back. It's nice to win. And then if they could shift even to a Champions Cup style format, next year we have Super Rugby Aotearoa and Super Rugby AU, and then the best teams from that go into a Super Rugby competition thereafter, like a postseason.
Like a Champions Cup, having your domestic league and your Champions Cup. And I wonder, like in the future, if South African rugby shifts up north, if in the future you might have a competition where you might have a situation where there's the Japanese league that's domestic, you've got a Super Rugby Australia, perhaps with a Fijian franchise, you've maybe got an Argentine domestic league, and then maybe the winners of all those competitions come together to play in some sort of maybe 8 or 10 team tournament. I think that could be a more beneficial way going forward. But I'll give you the last word on this, Don. Would you like to see the Springboks in the Six Nations?
Six Nations 5 years. Six Nations 2025. Springboks v England at Twickenham.
Nowadays, anything could happen. But from a pure selfish point of view, it's nice playing the All Blacks every year. But at the end of the day, we used to have 1,000 professional players playing in South Africa. That's how many professional players we had, and that's a lot. And now we're down to 400, I think 460, because they just halved the amount of contracts. So we had to get rid of those players. So we know we have such a great conveyor belt system from our school system that we get hundreds of players that come through, and it would be nice that we actually had the money to be able to have 1,000 professional players again, and that. In a country, we're not the richest country in the world, and it'd be nice because that supports a lot of families. It's a good salary for the people that are playing here. So just from that point of view, to save South African rugby for the amount of professional players, I think we have to go north. I think it's the writings on the wall from that point of view. The Six Nations generates a hell of a lot more money than Rugby Championship. In all honesty, it really does. And I think with CVC owning the Pro 16 and part of the Six Nations, I think there's negotiations happening in the back room, and I have a feeling we'll be up north sooner than you think.
I think you're probably right. Listen, there's not much more to say. I think we've gone well over the hour that I had imagined that it might be. But that's just
time.
It's every time.
You need to factor that into
we cannot really keep to a deadline to save our lives. So listen, I think we'll let you go anyway. Listen, happy Christmas to you, happy holidays.
Yes, you too.
Hope you have a nice season, and happy Christmas to everyone else out there. Happy holidays, whatever you're celebrating, and
stay safe.
Stay safe as well. Obviously,
keep safe. Wear your mask, hand sanitize. Keep your distance.
And keep watching the rugby.
Of course. Thanks very much, everybody.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.